For those of you who may not know him, Witsit is a flat earth debater who is quite popular here on YouTube. He is known for being very articulate and having a good memory and being a good debater. He has memorized a bunch of highfalutin jargon that he can spout off at you in debates that make him sound like he knows what he's talking about.
The physical Gaussian surface antecedent for the vertical electric field that's uniformly distributed.
I first met Witsit in person back in November at the Modern Day Debate Con, and I challenged him to a debate because I considered him to be one of the more worthy flat earth opponents, and I wanted to debate him. He agreed and took up the challenge and said that I should message him. So I emailed him, got no response. I then made a telegram, sent him a message on Telegram. He said, what date works for you? I told him, no response. So, at this point, I've been ghosted. Okay. I then ran into him on Discord. I once again asked him for debate. He said, yeah, that's going to happen. That's going to happen. And then, again, I hear nothing from him. So, I eventually joined one of his videos on his channel. And that's what we're going to watch today. Because I don't know why he won't take up my challenge. I even sent in a super chat to a recent debate that he did, because he's still doing debates. Like, he says, I don't really do debates anymore. And then since I first laid down the challenge, he's done like 8 debates. I mean, he'll debate seemingly anybody. Like, the only necessary criteria, it appears like, is that you've never done a flat earth debate before. Because, I mean, the debate opponents that he's been getting have not been the cream of the crop. Let's just say that.
Question from Based Theory for $1.99 is a challenge to Witsit to debate him. He says, stop dodging my challenge.
I don't know who that is, bro. You know how many people say that? Like, I'm in Discord on a regular.
Grayson from Based Theory.
How are you going to say that I'm ducking? In literally the last video on my YouTube, Grayson jumped on to debate me for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. The only one talking with me the whole time. But I did say that I would eventually debate him on specific subjects. I don't care to do that, but I'm making an exception in a way. But dude, I just gave you my platform for 2 straight hours on the last show. What are you talking about? I'm ducking you debating, bro. That's weird. Good try, I guess.
So let's go over that interaction that I had on Witsit's channel. So again, this wasn't a flat earth debate. He hasn't really been debating flat earth recently. He says he's trying to move away from the flat earth debates. I wonder why that could be. And he's trying to move into more debates about gravity and geocentrism and ether and all this stuff. So in this particular video, the stream that I joined, the topic was supposed to be about Witsit's idea that gravity is not really the curvature of space-time. Einstein is wrong. He says gravity is actually electromagnetic in nature. So I joined and I bring up the fact that, hey, the one thing we know about electromagnetism is that there's 2 kinds of charges, positive and negative. And they're both affected the same way by gravity. So that's how we know it's not electromagnetic in nature, because all electric fields affect opposite charges in opposite ways. But yeah, when I first joined the stream, he had me muted. So none of my initial opening statement or opening comments even made it to his audience. I was muted the whole time. That's just been lost to history, I guess. So I've gone ahead and included the part from when I first become audible. So here's that part. In 2023, CERN did an experiment about the effect of gravity on the motion of antimatter to see if it was affected by gravity in the same way as regular matter, even though it has an opposite charge. And their results showed that it was affected in the exact same way. So there wasn't a measurable difference between matter and antimatter, the effects on its motion in a gravitational field.
Okay, what is antimatter, bro?
It's matter with an opposite charge, like a proton and an antiproton.
With an opposite charge?
Yeah, so an electron negatively charged, positron positively charged, but they have the same mass and other properties.
Okay. Antimatter just sounds like an insane phrase. So what I want to show you real fast is this, because I don't even know what antimatter is. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's a ridiculous phrase. But we're going
So
to.
you don't accept the existence of antimatter, or you're just skeptical about it?
Well, yeah, I don't even. That doesn't even make any sense to me. Antimatter, like, what does that mean? Like, it just isn't
Well, it's just a
tangible.
name,
Like,
right?
it just.
But do you understand, like how it was predicted from Dirac's equations? Like, do you understand, like the reason why it was predicted by
Yeah, because
Dirac?
they used an ether framework, right? Like Dirac point blank said, like, we are rather forced to have an ether. So when you assume there's an ether, you understand there's equal and opposite reactions. And that's all
Do
that they're
you?
hijacking there. And that's why I'm about to show you this paper.
So I think I made my point pretty clear by bringing up antimatter. It should be affected oppositely if gravity is electromagnetic in nature, because opposite charges react oppositely to electromagnetic fields. It's obvious. Witsit then obfuscates it by saying antimatter. That sounds like an impossible term. What do you mean antimatter? And playing this semantics game when really he knows what we're talking about. And then he gets triggered when I bring up Dirac and starts talking about, oh, well, Dirac believed in an ether. Well, that has nothing to do with what I was bringing up, but it really annoys me when people talk about ether because everybody seems to mean something different when they mention ether. Like the original concept of ether in the 1800s means something totally different than what Dirac was talking about when he brought up ether. Like in the 1800s, the ether was providing an absolute frame of reference for space. There was ether drag effects that were predicted. You move through the ether. Dirac's ether is like a field, a mathematical field of negative energy where the particles are holes in this ether. It's like a totally different conception. He just used the word ether. And Witsit's concept of ether is different than both of theirs. So they're all three talking about different things and they're all calling it ether. This is why I don't like it when people talk about ether and don't clarify what it is that they're actually talking about, what physical characteristics they're talking about when they talk about ether. And now he's going to try to shift the question away and just bring up the fact that there's this guy, Konstantin Mies, who wrote a paper about the electromagnetic nature of gravity, and we're going to break that down. And it actually ties right back in to what I was saying with CERN and antimatter.
And that's why I'm about to show you this paper, which I feel like you should have seen this paper. It's called The Electromagnetic Nature of Gravity.
Is it that Mies paper?
Yes.
Well, the Mies paper is interesting because I believe in it, it specifically says that if this electromagnetic nature of gravity is correct, then antimatter should behave oppositely. So this CERN experiment from 2023 seems to debunk this Mies paper.
Okay. I don't know anything about the CERN experiment. I'd have to actually read it, and then it has to be. So basically, no one else in the world can verify this. I'm guessing, right? Because CERN uses just gigantic magnetic fields and then reifies particles. That's what it actually does. It uses gigantic magnets. That's all it's doing. So it is intrinsically electromagnetic. Everything that they're observing is based on electromagnetism. So this claim of antimatter is kind of goofy, but that's what I'm challenging the antimatter. I'll happily look at whatever test you're talking about, but I'm not just going to blindly believe it, right? But let's just read what he's saying here. You said you read it. In this way, the gravitational constant expressed by equation 21 is positive for both matter and antimatter. Gravitation forces are attractive between bodies of ordinary matter as well as between bodies of antimatter, but they should be repulsive between matter and antimatter according to Newton's gravitational potential since they have positive and negative masses following the mass charge equivalence. And what you're saying is that they're not repulsive. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's not a repulsion there. That's what CERN was showing, at least anyway. And yeah, it's not like you can replicate this in your backyard or whatever. It's it's hard to get hold of antimatter in the first place. It's much more expensive than gold, and not many people have access to a particle accelerator. So
okay, so I gotta be real with you, man. CERN claiming something about antimatter isn't really gonna be too particularly satisfactory for me.
okay, what I really love about this part is that Witsit literally showed on screen where the paper says point blank that they expect that CERN experiments will provide a definite answer to this question about if gravity is electromagnetic or not based on how antimatter behaves in a gravitational field. Like, the paper itself says that. And then Witsit just scrolls back up so that you can't see that on screen, and then says, well, the CERN results don't really mean much to me. I mean, who is CERN anyway? It's only like the biggest scientific collaboration of the 21st century, with like thousands of the world's most preeminent particle physicists working on like huge amounts of data from the most advanced machine ever devised by man. But I mean, whatever, right?
CERN claiming something about antimatter isn't really going to be too particularly satisfactory for me, because what I can do in reality, right? And I will say, like, if at least if we have to go as far as like, oh well, apparently in this last year CERN did something with antimatter to show it's not possible. We're at least making progress, I think, maybe. But the questions like, why do positive and negative things not fall at different weights? Or why doesn't positive go up or negative go down? Why don't they go opposite ways? These questions are just showing that there's a lack of understanding in the actual position, for example, that I hold, right? And so like I think we should go through this a bit step by step, and then we can figure out, like, is this CERN thing reliable? Like, are they running it through some type of interpretive computer model? Like, exactly what is it? Are they reifying antimatter, et cetera? Are they hijacking the ether like usual? But because, Dirac used an ether model. It's all it is, equal and opposite reactions. Gravity shouldn't have an equal and opposite reaction, but in your paradigm. But this is, I guess, to not get it too convoluted, right? Let's answer the first question. If there is a downward electric current, would that create a downward bias?
Yeah, to avoid getting too convoluted, let's just change the subject. Now that Witsit has made it to a point where he no longer wants to defend against the points being made, he's just going to switch the subject to, back to this question about the downward acceleration being electromagnetic, which we literally just got through debunking with a real-world experiment.
Would that create a downward bias?
For positive charges, I can accept that, but for negative charges, I'm still not convinced.
So if there's actually like downward electric pressure pressing on all matter, and it's actually all over the Earth, which is where we get like these crazy numbers here of like 700 megawatts with such a large current coming down all over the Earth, right? So you think that a negatively charged item would not be affected by it?
It would be affected. It would just have an upward bias, not a downward bias.
Okay. Now, then what you're saying is that all negatively charged objects on the Earth have an upward bias because the downward current is provable and measurable. So if what you were saying was true, and that would mean that all negatively charged objects on the Earth have an upward bias. So are you willing to stand behind that claim?
Well, that was what would seem to be implied by Feynman's paper there. So yeah, although I think that since he was specifically talking about this, like these electric currents being conducted by the air, that in a vacuum, such as at CERN, that we would not observe those effects.
Oh, sorry, I muted. Okay. In a vacuum, we still have vacuum permittivity. Okay. There is no way to remove it. For once, of course, there's no such thing as a perfect vacuum. And I'm not being like pedantic. I'm saying
I
like,
can agree with all that.
So there is still charge there. And we know there's also like, there's the electromagnetic vacuum in general, where like the charge changes. The amount of electromagnetic energy in the vacuum fluctuates and changes as if it's coming from somewhere. We also know that the vacuum has impedance, 377 ohms, impedance of free space. So there's something in that vacuum chamber. It isn't nothingness, right? And there is vacuum permittivity. There's electric permittivity and magnetic permeability in the vacuum. All that to say, whatever object's inside the vacuum is interacting with that medium. So that's still there. And we shown that even in a Van de Graaff generator, whenever you take like a voltmeter, you can measure the vertical electric gradient, like increasing as you go up from the ground, even inside of the Faraday cage.
Faraday cage?
Yeah, but so like I guess the point I'm making here is, do you think that we would be able to notice that all negative objects have an upward bias?
Um, yeah, because at that point, right, the effect would be very small, but I wouldn't say that, I mean, there might be ways that we could notice it. I wouldn't be able to say authoritatively either way. But really quick, you do you have like the source for this saying that even within a Faraday cage we can observe this electric gradient?
Yeah. Zach did it. We did it. We actually did it ourselves. So I mean, I'm assuming it's obviously can be done by someone else since Zach did it, but I can give you that experiment and we can redo it if it isn't satisfactory for you. But
Yeah.
um, this is the important part.
So you trust Zach a lot more than CERN, right? That'd be fair.
Well, yeah, because I can go do what Zach did. And it's not about trusting someone. It's like I can do it. Like I made objects float in my office.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not
Like
doubting that.
yeah, but what I think is important, bro, is like if the critique of the question is, would a downward electric current cause a downward bias? And so if the answer is for positive charges, not for negative, well then you're insinuating that everything that's negatively charged will have an upward bias on the Earth. And so, like, is there any evidence for that? Like, is there any measurable evidence that negatively charged objects have a bias up? Because in reality, they're going to still have a net bias down, certainly with any type of material composition, because they're going to then have a buoyant relationship with the medium.
Okay, this has got to be one of my favorite parts of the debate. The infamous, my friend Zach did it. So, yeah, he rejects CERN. He rejects the majority of physics from the last 100 years. But, oh, his buddy Zach did the experiment. And he can trust Zach. I mean, Zach's a stand-up guy. Zach wouldn't lie to him. Zach wouldn't perform an experiment incorrectly. Zach's an expert. I mean, it's really so funny. And as soon as I try to nail him on this, he then changes the subject again. And I mean, at this point, I played a little bit of it, but over the next 10 minutes of this stream, I think I talk for a grand total of maybe 15 seconds, and Witsit talks for like the rest of the 9 minutes and 45 seconds. I mean, it is literally so much rambling and so much jargon being thrown out that is like not even relevant to the topic, that I decided to spare you guys all of that noise. So if you actually want to listen to Witsit's entire ramblings and you want an unedited version of this entire exchange, I'll link that video down in the description. But like, yeah, I don't think anybody really wants that, to be honest. So I just skip the ramblings and get to the main point that he was trying to bring up at the end of all that business. Personally, I would say that when you're saying that you've done these cause and effect relationship establishments with experiments in electromagnetism, I would say that you're not really isolating gravity during those experiments. So you're not. That's what I would posit, is that those experiments are not showing that electrostatics is like the only cause for this net downward acceleration, but could be a potential variable that needs to be accounted for. I would agree. But I would say that you're not isolating gravity when you're doing those experiments. But I would say that there is a variant of the Cavendish experiment that was performed at the University of Vienna in 2021, where they did isolate, that they were looking at non-electromagnetic forces. So if you want to say that was some unknown physics and wasn't gravity, I mean, okay, but we know it was not electromagnetic or electrostatics or anything like that,
How do you know
because
that?
they controlled and accounted for that in their experimental design.
How did they do that?
So there were 3 ways that they did this, and you'll probably object to the first 2 maybe, but I would like to understand how you would respond to the third one. So the first one was just that they grounded the entire experiment. I mean, yeah, duh. So I know that there's objections to that or whatever. But then secondly, they discharged both of the test masses. So they like shot off all of the charges that were on the surface so that they could, eliminate as much of that as they could. And then the third thing, which is what I'm interested in, is that they put a Faraday shield in between the two masses so that no electromagnetic waves could be exchanged between them. So that, to me, I mean, seems like they're thoroughly accounting for any potential electromagnetic effects. And they did observe an actual, like, registered force between the objects, like, as in a registered force measured in newtons. So you can still measure pseudo forces in newtons in experiment. So yeah, I'd just be interested in hearing your response.
What I do want to do is, because I have to use the bathroom. So if anyone else wants to like also chat with him, or anyone else has anything else they want to say, let's just put a pause on this, because I have to step away for just a couple minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay, so at this point, Witsit goes on a little potty break for like 5 or 10 minutes, and I end up talking with just the other flat earthers in his Discord. So I cut that part out. It was actually a pretty fun and interesting conversation, but essentially they're just trying to poke holes in the experiment that I brought up with this really small version of the Cavendish. And it was just so funny. It was so funny, their attempts to try to refute this. So I don't know if I explained it the best in that little clip, but essentially there's these masses right on this little beam, and you can measure the amount of force that this beam is being twisted with, and they grounded it, they discharged the surface, and they put a Faraday shield. So there's these two like small little masses, and they're oscillating one mass like this back and forth, and then they're measuring the force that's felt on the second mass, and there's a Faraday shield in between them so that no electromagnetic waves can traverse from one mass to the other. There's no electromagnetic forces that can be exchanged between the two. So one of the guys literally asked me, like, well, could the Faraday shield be the one that's creating these forces? After all, it has mass too. Like, that's some sort of gotcha. Like, dude, the force that was observed varied with the distance of the second mass. That Faraday shield is in the same place the whole experiment, but they're observing a fluctuation in the force that's proportional to the distance that second mass is from the first mass. So, like, yeah, I'm just going to spare you all that nonsense. It was pretty funny, but Witsit eventually does return, and we are going to talk about this experiment because this pretty much definitively shows that gravity is not electromagnetic in nature.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just now getting back. I want to, so I missed some of this here, right? But I wanted to really drive home the fact that at all times, the object is receiving charge from the medium. It's always going to be having a relationship with the medium electrically. And that's the reason we actually have to ground it. So, for example, if they had not grounded this test, what would have happened? Well, of course, it would have charged up. So what that means is, as it's charging up, it's discharging it as soon as it can. So I'm sorry, and you may have to repeat yourself, right? But was this in a vacuum chamber?
Yes. I believe it was 10 to the negative 7 millibar.
Okay. So it was in a vacuum chamber, it was grounded, and then what's the other thing?
The surfaces of both of the masses were discharged, and then there was a Faraday shield in between them.
Okay. That is probably the most effective you could be. And so with that being said, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this effect was incredibly small. Right? Was the effect really small? Like what do you know what the masses were made of, or how big they are? Or?
They were gold. They were, I believe, made of gold, and they were, I think, 50 milligrams each. So this was the smallest variant of the Cavendish experiment ever done.
Right. Okay. So that actually makes sense, right? Because that means the smaller the effect of electrostatics, the greater net impact it would have, right? Or net effect. So that Faraday material in between the two masses, right? It's still comprised of matter. It's still within the vacuum, which again, I covered specifically why the vacuum doesn't cut this out, because we have, of course, electromagnetic vacuum. We got people coming up with stuff like quantum foam, blah, blah, blah. We have the Casimir effect, right? And that's both attractive or repulsive, but typically attractive. Good.
This study did say that if they if they were going to do this on a smaller scale, even smaller than 50 milligram masses, which they're thinking about, they said then they would have to account for the Casimir effect, and it would not be negligible as it was in this instance.
Wow, that's pretty interesting, because I was just making a point, but I mean, I would have to see how they somehow justified the claim that they know that it's quote unquote negligible, because I guarantee you that what they measured was incredibly small. Like when you're talking about masses that small, the effect is for sure small. I also know that it's electric. Like I know there's no such thing as mass attracting mass or anything like that. Like that's not real. Like I know that, which means I immediately interpret this test to be automatically electrostatic.
And here is the most damning part of the debate for Witsit. He lets it slip that he already knows, before he looks at this experiment or any experiment, he already knows that there's no such thing as gravity and that it has to be electromagnetic in nature. He literally says that. So, like, no amount of evidence is ever going to be able to convince him otherwise, because he's already made up his mind before any of the evidence is presented to him. Like, I mean, it's just giving the whole game away at that point, saying, like, I already know there's no such thing as gravity. So all these experiments that are definitively showing that gravity is not electromagnetic in nature, I mean, I brought up 2 of them in this exchange, both of which show definitively that gravity cannot be electromagnetic. And yet, Witsit, who has not read either of them, says, well, look, I already know that there has to be something about these papers. I mean, if I go through these papers, I'll have to find something that can allow me to continue to believe that gravity is electromagnetic in nature, because I already believe that. And then, I'm going to try to call him out for this, because literally earlier in the stream, he literally accused globe earthers as doing this exact behavior. Like, he was complaining about how people that think the earth is a globe have such closed minds, and they won't even consider evidence that's contrary to their a priori positions. It's like, oh, really, Witsit? Really? That's what you're going to complain about? Okay. And so as soon as I try to nail him on that, guess what he's going to do? Oh, if you guessed that he was going to try to change the subject and throw out a bunch of jargon, wow, you got it right. Amazing.
Like, I know that, which means I immediately interpret this test to be automatically electrostatic. So what that means, and it's also a relationship with, like, say, the background, right? So what people call the electromagnetic vacuum, or there's also dielectric permittivity, the impedance of free space, all of this stuff, right? The medium interacting with the object, even if it's grounded, it's constantly doing that. So I already know, I'll say, because I haven't read it, that the effect was very small. Right. And the way I know that is because, well, if you actually put something in between the two objects, like a Faraday material, right? Well, okay, that's interesting. For one, isn't that also mass? But anyway.
Okay, so, well, can I address some of these?
Yeah.
So the Faraday shield stayed in place as they varied the second mass's distance from the first mass. So, like, that was a constant. The independent variable was the distance of that second mass that was continuously varying, and it was corresponding with that distance to the second mass that they registered a change in the force felt by the first mass in newtons. So, and then I just find this really interesting. You don't think that it's, like, problematic at all that you're kind of like, you already know before even reading the paper, you already know that it can't be talking about gravity and it must be talking about electromagnetic.
No. Like
Earlier tonight,
I don't do that.
or-
I don't do that. I specifically said I'll read the paper. I haven't. I said I feel like I know, because that's what globe earthers typically do. I'm not saying that.
Earlier tonight, you were just saying that the Globers do that with the papers.
But
that
I'm
you
not.
give
I'm
them.
not saying that. See, the difference here is I'm saying I'm acknowledging a real life effect that we know exists. So you're invoking something we don't know exists that requires reification. I do think that this is interesting. This is why I do enjoy talking to you, right? Because these things are really starting to lay things out in detail here, right?
And there's the dodge, of course. And I'm sorry, Witsit, but I don't believe that you really enjoy talking with me, considering the fact that you keep ghosting me and refusing to take up my challenge to have a debate. So, like, why should I believe that you actually enjoy talking with me? He's like, oh yeah, I enjoy talking with you because you bring up all these details. Yeah, the details that you don't want to address because you know your position falls apart when you go into the details. Like, his whole excuse up to this point has just been, yeah, but this effect is really small, right? Yeah, Witsit, we're measuring the gravitational effects between two tiny little milligram-sized masses. Like, of course it's going to be small, but that doesn't contradict anything because it's small, but still measurable. And it was measured. Like, just because an effect is small doesn't mean it's not real or cannot be measured. And again, this effect was measured. It's small, but we have the measurements. And guess what? It was way too large of an effect for it to be electromagnetic. They literally accounted for all of those variables in their mathematics. And they show it in the paper too. It's like, this is not even a valid rebuttal in the least. But of course, he's going to try to spin this and say, and start to argue against other globe earthers that he's debated before, and just gonna try to stop even engaging with the actual arguments I'm bringing up and start engaging with just some imagined globe earthers that he thinks, that he's debated before, and he's just gonna change the subject, of course.
This is why I do enjoy talking to you, right? Because these things are really starting to lay things out in detail here, right? Which is where this notion that it's been such a terrible argument this whole time. Well, then why would this precise of a test of a Cavendish, right? Why would they be so overly concerned with electrostatics, trying everything in their power to control that variable to find gravity, if some everyday high schooler can go and do it? It's because they know that it is in fact a major problem to attempt to isolate quote unquote gravity beyond electrostatics, because that variable can never be eliminated. The most you can ever hope to do is to control it the best you can. The problem with it is that it's constantly in a state of flux. It's constantly fluctuating. You can never truly control the variable of electrostatics, right? You can never be like, I know it's this amount. And so now that we've accounted that it's automatically this amount, then we're good. And I'll read the paper, because I would be surprised if they would ever suggest that they actually got zero. I'm assuming that they just eventually claimed, look, we did the best we could, so we're going to consider this negligible. But I do want to drive home that point. Don't you agree that it's very telling that if I think it's a university, if this precise of a test, the smallest Cavendish ever done, this is in modern times, had to go through this extreme lengths to eliminate the variable of static electricity and its effect on the Cavendish quote unquote experiment, which isn't a scientific experiment, of course, it reifies things, right? Like, that really destroys this whole notion of all these globe earthers running around the internet acting like it's so laughably irrelevant to talk about electrostatics in response to Cavendish. Obviously, this university disagrees, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't try to mind read the authors of this study about what their motives were. I think that they just did an excellent job trying to control as many of these variables so that they could isolate specifically gravity as the coupling force. So
that's my point, though, bro. Grayson, that's my point. My point is these people are trying to isolate gravity. So what was their primary focus on? Electromagnetic variables, which goes to show that they know that that's the thing they have to worry about if they're going to try to isolate
Yeah, because you wouldn't
gravity.
have to, on this scale at least, they were saying that the effects of the Casimir effect would be negligible. Obviously, other forces like the strong and weak force wouldn't really be a thing here. So the only other force that you would be isolating for would be electromagnetism. So, yeah, I mean, they tried their best to isolate it. They did it in a vacuum. They did a lot of things that I thought were a great job about why this paper
No, I
doesn't.
think that's good. I think that's good, dude. That like okay, I want to read the paper because I am quite positive it wasn't like this. Oh, every time we do it, we're getting this same result. Right? I would find that extremely hard to believe. To be the first time in the history of mankind that they did that. Okay. It was still fluctuating. They were trying to find it within an error margin of what they had thought gravity would be. But my point here remains, which is they, in the most precise Cavendish to date on the Earth ever done, are hyper focused on static electricity. And it requires them to make baseless assertions like the Casimir effect is negligible. That's just a claim. So if it was smaller, it wouldn't be negligible. But at this size, you can just claim it's negligible. The Casimir effect is admittedly not well understood. They recently discovered that it can even result in repulsion, right? It's also not consistent with the magnitude. The Casimir effect is not a completely understood phenomenon whatsoever. So for someone to come along and say, well, we know it's negligible, that isn't true. And that there's a background that's giving us electromagnetic energy. It constantly fluctuates. We can't even properly predict the electromagnetic fluctuations in a vacuum. So all of these variables are going to show you this result's not going to be consistent. It's going to fluctuate. On the smallest scale, electrostatics is 10 to the 36 power stronger than gravity's been claimed to be, which means you're going to have to completely get rid of this variable to claim to find something that does the same exact thing that's way weaker. So I applaud them. That's the best you could ever try to do, or something like that, right? But it doesn't actually, unfortunately, Cavendish is a losing battle for you guys because on the smallest scale, Cavendish is electrostatics is 10 to 36 power stronger.
So, I wish for some reason I'm having issues logging into my account to see the full article because the Nature article is behind a paywall normally, but normally I can access it. So it's
If you can
put it in
drop it,
chat
we can
for
get it
you.
for free. Yeah.
Yeah,
but
I put it in chat for you already. If you scroll up,
okay,
it's
cool.
it's at 12:26 past the hour.
Because they did calculate at some point. I remember reading this in here. I think that they said that by their calculations, the electromagnetic forces involved, even with all of their, controlled to isolate, would still be only about, I think they said either 10 or 30% of the observed force in their experiment. I'm trying to find that part of the paper.
Wait. So it said. Wait, I'm sorry. Like, can you repeat that? It said what was only that percentage?
Like the electromagnetic effects would only be, I can't remember if it was 10 or 30% of the observed effect, even like despite all their controls or whatever. But they did the calculations.
So they're
to find
conceding that like a percentage of the effect is from the electromagnetic variables. And they're then saying, of course they're going to say this, right? Because they did their best. And so they're going to say like, even though you can never truly eliminate it, blah, blah, blah. But like, I don't even see, maybe I'm dumb, right? But that doesn't make any sense to me because on the smallest scale, electrostatics is 10 to 36 power, stronger than gravity claims to be. So what they're going to have to claim is that they basically eliminated it like to such an extent that the total maximum electromagnetic effect that could be observed there would still be weaker than gravity, right? That's obviously what they're having to claim. And that's an insane claim because even if it's 50 mg, right? All molecular and intermolecular attractive forces are electrostatic in nature. And on the smallest molecular scale, it's 10 to the 36 power stronger than gravity's claimed to be. Well, you're actually compiling the molecules together to get the mass in the first place, right? So you can't, it's like dropping a grain of salt on the beach and claiming that you found it.
So, yeah, I found the part. They said the electrostatic coupling between source mass position and test mass force can be suppressed well below 3% of the expected gravitational signal. So, Yeah, they're saying like the electrostatic coupling is 3% below where they're expecting the gravitational signal to be, which I think was later measured. And also, just real quick, they do show their calculations for figuring out that the Casimir force would be negligible. They have the formula for the Casimir force in the article as well. So I don't want to just drop an article you haven't read on yet, but I would be very interested in talking about this when you've done a deep dive on this article.
No, yeah, I'm happy to revisit this once I do, because I don't want the whole show just to be this, but I'm just going to kind of state my position very clearly, and it's going to take me a second, but I'm going to name all the variables, which is what you have to do in physics, right? So it's in a vacuum chamber. That's a good step, but there's something called the impedance of free space, right? There's something called dielectric permittivity, and there's something called magnetic permeability.
Anyone want to bet whether or not Witsit is actually going to read this paper in depth and then be able to have a substantive conversation about it at some later point? Yeah, what are the odds for that, huh? So I'm actually going to leave in most of his rant. I mean, we already know what he's going to do. He's going to dodge, change the topic, and start a huge rant bringing up a ton of jargon that's just too much for any one person to respond to. I'm actually going to leave this one in just so that you guys can get a flavor of what it's like debating this guy.
There's also something called the electromagnetic vacuum. And the fact is that those variables fluctuate constantly. Like electromagnetic nature, like the electromagnetic fluctuations in a vacuum constantly fluctuate. And they're largely unpredictable. Now, like a lot of like quantum fanboys will claim that it's super predictable. No, just deep dive in it. You'll find out that it's not. Right? They have a general idea, but there's always these moments where things happen they can't expect. There's more energy than it's supposed to, and it's inexplicable. They don't know where it comes from. It comes from nowhere. It pops into existence. Okay? So those are important variables. Other important variables are, yes, you ground it, but there is no such thing as a perfect vacuum. So not only is there electromagnetic energy, we'll say, coming from something other than the air, because if you do the math for the amount of air, like say a few hydrogen atoms per cubic meter, you do the math, like there's way too much electromagnetic effect to simply be accounted for by strictly the air, right? But also the air also has an effect, even though it's like seemingly like the strongest vacuum you can really replicate on the Earth. So whatever is in there is also going to be interacting with the objects. And in fact, one can even argue that like drawn towards the objects because of that charge, and which is pretty interesting, but maybe not completely true because we know how gas behaves. So anyway, so if you include all of those variables, that it's going to constantly be receiving charge from its environment, that it's intrinsically electrostatic, and the molecules holding it together are 10 to the 36 power stronger than gravity's even claimed to be. Yeah, sure, I'll look at their math, but I would love to know how they supposedly do that, because the way you get mass is a compilation of matter, right? So if on the smallest scale of matter, electrostatics is 10 to the 36 power stronger than gravity's claimed to be, how are you going to then take a bunch of those small units, compile it together, and get more gravity? You're going to have to internally neutralize these things. That is impossible, right? That is not actually possible. What they're doing is discharging it the best they can. They're grounding it. They're putting something in between it, and they're trying their best. So long story short, I will read the paper. I'm actually very grateful for the paper because it proves that they know a variable that they absolutely must account for in any Cavendish is electrostatic electricity. It proves how difficult it is, really impossible it is to ever actually eliminate it. They're admitting that there's still a number there that it can at least be. And I would just say that they're probably overly zealous because their goal is to verify gravity. And even worse than that, it's like, say that you were able to magically eliminate the variable of static electricity, which you can't, and they didn't. You still have to then just reify the idea of what is there. And then what I'm going to see is like, oh, that effect wasn't consistent. What was the p-value? Did they record all of the measurements? Did they just cherry pick and throw them out when they weren't what they were supposed to be? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm interested. I'll read it. Maybe even try to contact them, see if we can get below the surface. But long story short, yeah, I mean, the Cavendish is a futile pursuit for any globe Earth proponent because static electricity is 10 to the 36 power, stronger than gravity's even claimed to be on the smallest scale. You can't eliminate that variable. It's always in the medium. It's always in the object. It's always in any of the material creating the chamber. It's always in the vacuum. It's also in whatever air is inside the vacuum chamber. That being said, a force being that much stronger, giving you the same exact effect that you're supposedly looking for eliminates the possibility of you isolating the much weaker force or cause from within that force that's not a force and blah, blah, blah. So that's, that's my position. I like math and nuh-uhs and Casimir effect. I promise it wouldn't count and whatever. Baseless assertions of math aren't going to cut it. I'll check it out. And if they have sufficient experimental evidence to back it up, then we can go from there. But I do appreciate the paper. But
we can agree to disagree on all that, I suppose, but for the sake of moving on, we can move on. All right, so as we can see, that was a huge rant to just say, these scientists and their baseless assertions of math. It's like, no, that's just physics. Witsit? That's physics. They were doing physics formulas and accounting for variables. Like, they did an excellent job for accounting for all of the variables to definitively show that their results could not have been electromagnetic in nature and was, in fact, them measuring gravity. And in response, he just says, well, math. What is math anyway? It's all just baseless assertions of, mathematical formulas. So that's how my exchange with Witsit went when I went on his channel. That was about the sum of the exchange, basically. And then now you see he went on Modern Day Debate after that and was debating people that had never debated Flat Earth before and were not very good representatives they were not very good going up against someone like Witsit, where you kind of have to know his arguments or know the science in depth to be able to combat the amount of jargon that he's going to be throwing at you. And then I sent in the super chat. He said, whoops, we've already debated, bro. What are you talking about? And then he said, I'll debate him on specific things, and I'd be making an exception. Like, what exception? You debate people all the time. So I don't get that. But anyways, I decide to join the after show whenever I see Witsit is in there. And that gets kind of fun. It was on Ozian's stream at Matters Now. They do after shows for Modern Day Debates. And it's different in an after show, especially when you have a panel with lots of people that are going to be talking. You kind of have to be a little bit more aggressive. So this was not just like a chill conversation like the previous one. This was a little bit more heated, but it was exciting because at least at first, Witsit was actually engaging with flat Earth arguments. I'm like, finally, I get to debate Witsit on flat Earth itself. So let's see how that goes on Ozian's panel, shall we?
I've personally talked to someone that worked with NASA. That's an actual person. That's not some story I made up. He's going to come on my show. He worked with NASA, was stationed in Antarctica for 6 months for NASA. And he said not one single time in that entire 6 months did he see the sun in the sky for 24 hours, but he did see daylight for 24 hours. He made it very clear, and he ended up becoming a flat earther. So I don't know what Globers do when they hear stuff like that. They convince themselves I'm lying, they're lying, whatever. But yeah, man, there you go.
No, it's just an argument about veracity. There's a logic
fallacy. You're roboting Leo really bad, but
so Flat Earth does have a response for how it could be. You say you can't see the sun, but it maintains daylight for 24 hours. You do have a justification for that in a Flat Earth model?
Welcome, Grayson, by the way.
Yeah, sorry.
You never heard the Flat Earth answer for the 24-hour daylight?
In the North Pole, like in the Arctic, I have, but not in like the Southern Hemisphere, like Ushuaia in Argentina.
Yeah, the coffee cup caustic. So if you have some type of dome container, light will reflect all the way around the outside of it. It can be replicated to perfectly match what we observe. What no one really seems to be able to answer is if you saw the sun itself. If you don't see the sun itself, but you only see the light, that should be very interesting to people. But it's not though.
So
clearly.
You said I should Google coffee cup caustic. Is that what you said?
Yes, it's just a phenomenon where it's say if you take a coffee cup and you put it in the light from the window, what you'll see is that the light will wrap all the way around the circle, the interior circle.
I've seen I thought on Twitter.
I thought that the sun was inside the dome.
Well, okay. That why would that not work though? It's just the fact if there's a circular shape, it would wrap all around. Of course, my actual position is that there's 7 layers to it. There's 7 layers to the containment, and that the sun is in one of the lower ones. I would actually say that it goes moon, sun, stars. And that's why the sidereal motions of all the three are faster the further you go away. And that's why the sidereal rotation measurements with interferometry get faster the higher you go. But I would say they're all within different layers. That's what all the ancients said. That's what the evidence seemed to suggest. So that's what I currently think. It works perfectly on a flat earth. Coffee cup cost.
Okay, I do want to get the other flat earthers a chance, Mercedes and whatnot, to the super chat. Does anybody like disagree with Witsit on that, or want to add any other comments?
I mean,
there is one. The whole thing is assuming that there is a dome, but we don't have any even like a priori reasons to suppose that. So that's a greater assumption that the model has to make over the model we currently have, which makes it less simple and so less preferable.
Yeah,
Actually,
basic scientific Bayesian reasoning. And
it can't be that though, because all civilizations across the earth, no matter religion, regardless of anything, all depicted a solid dome going over the earth. So that's kind of a fallacy to state.
They
that,
also all believed that there was like a life force that kept things alive, and we now know that's not the case. There is no.
You said there was no a priori evidence.
The fact that there's
so
not a
what I'm saying is that the fact that a bunch of people said something throughout history that we've already scientifically falsified, like it doesn't matter what they said.
Well, I agree that just the fact that they thought it doesn't necessarily matter, but you said there was no a priori evidence, but you know that the flat earth position specifically does invoke that. They say that the necessary indicator to gas pressure is physical containment. You guys say nuh-uh.
That doesn't have anything to do with what I was referring to. So I can grant you that. I can grant you you're correct there, but it's not relevant to the point that I was making.
No, that's what we're saying is evidence that there's something physically containing the earth, is that itself. People also say the reflection of a rainbow. We also say the physical Gaussian surface antecedent for the vertical electric field that's uniformly distributed. So we do have claims a priori to support the notion that it's contained, and logically speaking, it would have to touch down to actually substantiate containment. So we absolutely do have a reason to say that. It isn't just a baseless or religious idea or anything like that. We do satisfy the very logical criteria that you just suggested.
Yeah, so I wasn't using that as a reason. I was just refuting your claim that it had never been, like, it wasn't used in the past, basically, but it really had been used in the past.
Well, he just made a claim that scientifically they disproved prana and chi life force. Like, you got like a citation or?
I mean, we're talking about this 24-hour daylight.
I know, but he did make that claim. I'm just playing.
Do you agree that if like Witsit goes to Antarctica, would you change your view on flat man B?
Oh, totally.
So you think if you saw a 24-hour sun in Antarctica, the Earth is a globe, or would it?
No, the Earth's not a globe. I'm just gonna have to be taken aback and try to figure out what's going on there.
Interesting.
I think. Would you guys do the same thing if you found out that it wasn't there?
Well, yes, if I didn't see a 24-hour sun, and there wasn't some weird, like, huge, like, alien ship blocking it or something, when I should see a 24-hour sun, I would be super, like, stressed out. I would not believe the Earth.
Super stressed out.
Yeah, I would change my view. Like, I wouldn't believe that our model was accurate at all. I would totally change.
I think when you go there, what you'll actually witness is you'll have daylight, but you won't see the physical orb of the sun. So kind of to answer the guy's question, if you saw the physical orb, that was the only way it would be a problem for the flat earth model and have to be like rethought and figured out again, right? Is if you saw the physical orb of the sun the whole time. But we would contend that when you go there, you're not going to see the physical orb. You're going to see the physical orb like go away, and you're still going to see light from it, but you're not going to see it. And then it's going to come back around and you're going to see it again, but you're just going to get the light from it.
And there are many things that you can do that could falsify flat earth. This is one of them that are up there towards the top of the list. It would definitely change everything that could be possibly claimed as flat earth. If you could actually verify that you circumnavigate directly over the center of Antarctica, pop back up on the other side of the ball, that's impossible on a flat earth. There are things that are impossible on a flat earth, unlike the things you guys claim are impossible, that can't be done. It's not weird that flat earthers are so obsessed with Antarctica. It's just like, no, we would rather not be flat earthers if the Earth's not flat. We would rather not be ridiculed for nothing. So like we immediately all were like, oh, dude, just let's circumnavigate north to south. Right? I mean, that's logical It's like, that's proof, right? It's exclusive. So that's what makes the flat earth so interesting to me, is there are actual things that could falsify it, that are realistically possible, that have never been verifiably done. We as individual researchers can't go verify those things. I think that that's weird. I think it's also weird that the most famous 24-hour sun video of Antarctica, we found out was edited. It was literally faked. We found out, and then they admitted that they faked it. They admitted that they chopped it up after we all got gaslit, saying that it's clearly got the same clouds at the beginning and end.
Well, let's see it go.
That's kind of weird, right?
Let's see it go to Antarctica.
There have been like multiple like pole to pole polar circumnavigations. So do you just say that all those were fake, or what? Like, well, there was one in 2019, I think.
Well, almost every time you guys claim that, we go look at the actual map projected, right? The actual route projected. And what they do is they dip off into Antarctica a little bit, then they loop back up around. They don't go directly over the entire center and interior of Antarctica, continuing to come back around the other side. All of these supposed polar circumnavigation north to south, you can look at their routes, and admittedly, they just dip down kind of into Antarctica and then pop back up. And then they go a little further, typically a little further east, right, to complete it. And that's highly suspect, bro. I mean, yeah. So we want to do it ourselves. I think you guys can understand that that's pretty reasonable with the amount of evidence. You know, like we want to verify it ourselves. Like what I showed in my opener, and it got completely hand waved. That just coincidentally, every single year, the same 2 days, the mountain sets below, or the sunset goes below or behind Antarctica. I mean, the Canada Mountains, and we see it. And you guys tell us it's refraction coincidentally every single year at the same predictable time.
I do want to keep it on.
Yeah, sorry, I'm talking a lot. Y'all go ahead.
Ozine, can I just really quick share my screen and then I'll drop it?
Okay.
Because this is when I Google the route from the 2019 trip. I mean, this is what comes up, and it's, you know, over south. So I would just need to see the source, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even though there shows that they come down and go up. They come down and go up, and actually, if you look at that on other projections, right, they you don't see them coming down and come up. Why can't we go directly across the center? They come down and then they come back up. Why? Why would you ever do that?
Because of where they need to land. Look, if they went further away, I mean, this is their route.
Middle of the Pacific.
No, it would be an actual circumnavigation. It would just take a little longer. But actually, Jaren has completely looked into all the details of this and completely destroyed it.
What he means is, why didn't it keep going straight down through that South Pole area that you guys saw on the map? Why didn't it go straight down and then loop back around through? Why did he curve and go off to the side? So it's like a bow tie instead of...
Sorry.
It's okay.
Well, really quick, because it's the Pacific Ocean, it's huge, and you can get lost. And it's better if you're going to do trips like that to go near land masses. So that would be why.
Well, it is, but if you're circumnavigating the Earth and you're trying to prove that it's a globe, and that's the one way to do it, then...
Well,
don't claim it proved it then. If you guys don't, it is a fine answer that it's dangerous to fly long durations over the Pacific Ocean without fuel. I understand that, but don't claim it proved it then.
But were they trying to prove it was a globe? I don't think they were.
I think they kind of were. They made a big deal about how it was the first time anyone's ever flown in a north to south circumnavigation. But anyway, he just invoked it like it was legitimate evidence of the globe. So
I think if I recall, it was because I mean, it's an amazing feat, but it's also dangerous. You know, I think there's multiple components going on there about why it's like, hell yeah, look what we did, guys, you know.
But even, I don't understand why you think it doesn't, prove the globe just because they didn't go the exact, the what they did still proves it. I don't see why it doesn't.
What? No, it doesn't. On a flat Earth, you could go down into Antarctica and then pop back up further north, but still be going northwest and come back around.
But when you have to travel around,
why? How could you? I don't understand that.
You guys would have to look at a flat Earth map. If you did, you'd understand what he's talking about.
But y'all don't own any flat Earth maps. Every time I bring one up, everyone tells me it's
Mercator.
not.
Look up Mercator.
Even showing that map, even showing that route on an AE map shows you that they could just dip into the ice and pop back up. And what I'm saying is it's like, oh, they did do it. And then we get into it. They didn't do it. And then it's like, oh, but they can. It's dangerous. That's fine. fair enough. I think that's actually a legitimate answer, possibly, right? But don't ever
Austin
invoke
is-
it. Don't ever
sorry.
invoke it again, right?
Okay, let's move on.
Isn't a sorry.
Let's stay to the show format a little bit. Thank you.
Okay.
I do have more super chats really quick.
Okay, so that was quite fun, actually getting to do actual flat Earth debate with Witsit rather than his whole gravity ether nonsense. And you kind of get to see how ridiculous the worldview is. I mean, he starts talking about 7 concentric rings of domes on the flat Earth. I mean, just wild stuff. He's talking about coffee cup caustics as being his explanation for things. Okay, Witsit. And then I do think that I could have done a better job of explaining why that 2019 polar circumnavigation of Earth disproves flat Earth, like regardless of how you look at it. So let's just look at that. Like, this was the flight route, and they said that it was possible to do this on a flat Earth. And they said, just look at any flat Earth map. And I'm like, okay, wow. So here's the flat Earth map. Here's what the route would look like on a flat Earth map. And again, we know the times that this flight went to these various airports. If they were really doing this route, where they have to traverse the circumference of the flat Earth when they're going over Antarctica, there's just not enough time for that to be possible. Like, that was the point I was trying to make, was that even if they don't do like a perfect, passing over the center of Antarctica in a perfectly straight line, even if they go from South America up to the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, that's still enough to completely debunk flat Earth. Like, this flight route is just straight up not possible in the time that it happened in real life on a flat Earth. Like, the point still stands. And unfortunately, that's all that Witsit is going to be talking about the flat Earth for the rest of this panel. I mean, Ozian, I love him, but he had a certain plan for like how this after show stream is going to go, and so it wasn't really the point of the stream was not really for to rehash a flat Earth debate, unfortunately, because that's the debate I really want to have with Witsit. But no, so we're gonna just transition to another subject, and Witsit is gonna start talking about how he doesn't think that electrons exist. Like, wow, I shouldn't be surprised by the guy that was saying antimatter sounds made up, but yeah, he's really going to go there and say that electrons do not exist. Just check it out.
A lot of people believe in quantum field theory. That's cool, bro. But the point is that, yeah, it is a perturbation in the background. You guys claim it's a physical particle of matter that has no known size or shape. And now it's just a density distribution of probability. You guys can't even figure out where it is. You just make a cloud of where you think it could be.
Witsit, do you have any explanation for the Millikan oil drop experiment in your worldview?
Yeah. It's just the smallest amount of charge that we could possibly measure. And that's why we called it the unit, the electron. The phenomena is real.
But you agree that you can calculate an individual mass per unit of charge. Okay. So fundamentally, you're saying there's no electron, but then all the observations of electrons are still the same.
Well, that's right. But except that you guys actually corporealize it, and the proof that it isn't corporeal is an electron microscope. And how is the electron microscope and how you cannot.
Look, if it looks like a duck, if it sounds like a duck,
they can't. So, like when you have an electron microscope, right? Say organic matter has to be sputter coated. Has to be metallically sputter coated in order to actually get the reflectance imaging of the electron microscope. If it was actually a physical particle of matter, I should be able to hit it against all other matter. I shouldn't have to create.
That doesn't logically follow.
Oh, explain how.
It depends on because it depends on how it interacts with other matter.
But I thought it was matter hitting matter.
It's very small. I don't think you're understanding the scales involved here.
Well, it's not just
that the other matter that's based on a physical.
Might not interact with certain materials depending on the structure of those materials.
So the matter goes through the matter.
Yeah, neutrinos. There's billions of them going through your body right now because they're such low energy, low mass.
Red herring fallacy.
Yeah, that's how the world works.
Okay,
red herring fallacy.
How is that a red herring fallacy?
We weren't talking about neutrinos. How is this another?
Yeah, I brought it up as an example, as an analogy. Were you not following? Or are you just randomly choosing to shout out fallacies because you don't have a response?
This is what I want to happen.
All right, you guys lost. It's okay.
This is why I want to have a debate on gravity. What gravity is?
I would love to debate you on gravity, bro.
Okay, because I can.
I would
I've been
love to
studying
debate
the
you on
panagraph.
why you think that you can claim there is no God.
Oh, that's even better. I'd love to.
Yeah, first and second law of
about it.
thermodynamics, bro.
I wrote a book about it,
We'll
and
say
I cover
nothing
that.
about God.
Yeah.
But the fact that evil exists means that God, as defined by classical theism, doesn't.
Well, let's not.
Okay,
let's move on.
That
to the
doesn't make
next
any sense.
Yeah, so Witsit just challenging Ozian to a debate. I mean, it really does seem like he just wants to debate anyone and everyone except for me at this point. Like, what am I supposed to think about that? Yeah, that was frustrating. It's also just frustrating to have these kinds of conversations on this, like, big panel like this where everyone's trying to talk and Ozian's trying to his best to direct it along, but that basically means that we can't really have the kind of, back and forth that would be necessary to really just deconstruct all of Witsit's nonsense, like in a 1v1 debate that I'm still hopefully trying to get with Witsit at some point, because he keeps saying it's going to happen. We'll see.
During a solar eclipse, the pendulum changes how it moves. That proves it can't be Earth spin, because it's something happening in the sky. Unless you just shift over post hoc rationalization, ad hoc, start making up things like, no, I think it's probably the gravity of blah, blah, blah. They've tried to do that with very specific, thorough analyses and shown that they can't actually do it without violating other claims of the gravitational model. So anyway, I didn't mean to take his whole point, to be honest.
Well, it says it's controversial among the scientific community as its testing is frequently met with inconsistent or ambiguous results over more than 5 decades of observation. So it's an interesting point. I'd have to look into it more.
I'm curious about why you guys trust these results when it sounds like it's controversial and people have tried to replicate it and haven't been able to. So
Harvard
you guys
did
are
it.
so skeptical about so many different experiments. So what is it that makes you think, oh, I can trust these results?
I mean, number one, it's completely intuitive and in line with the model I already believe in. And number two,
confirmation bias.
Number
I bet if you didn't
Harvard
interrupt him,
University.
then you'd be good.
Number
could he
two, Harvard
finish, or-
University studied it for 18 years and confirmed the consistency of the effects. And then number
Exactly.
three, other people besides them have done it as well. So it's been
Harvard observed it for 18 straight years. And guess what we've all decided to do? Try to replicate it, right? But your side has no answer. So they've just said, nuh-uh. So if Harvard themselves said that they've done it for 18 years, we're not just selectively choosing things. We're looking at the interpretation of all the different evidence. There is no interpretation globe friendly for that. So we're like, wow, dude, look at this evidence that no one's able to talk about. And all the Globers have said for 4 years is that it didn't happen.
The only thing left to do is to throw Harvard under the bus, bro.
That's what I was going to ask. The only so you do accept what Harvard is saying.
I accept evidence, not the forced interpretive conclusions of people with a philosophical bias. There's a difference. This is a test. This is a test that physically happens. We're talking about the physical evidence, not the interpretation of it. So yes, I trust physical evidence that can be replicated. I don't trust interpretations that assume and reify things.
Well, that's not true. You're doing that when you're talking about electron flow versus conventional flow, because you don't know. If you don't know what the preferred direction is for power flow, and you're just hooking it up because you can't actually measure that power flow, you are committing a reification fallacy by your own terms if you're saying you can't know and then just presuming. So you're presupposing is positive to negative.
And here we have it. I'm trying to call Witsit out on basically having extreme confirmation bias, and anytime that he finds a paper like that by Konstantin Mies or an experiment done by his buddy Zach that confirms what he already believes to be true, then all of a sudden that is a trusted source, that is reliable. But even when it's coming from Harvard, who he disagrees with on almost everything else, Harvard is not a flat earther, my dude. But okay, yeah. Even if it's coming from a source, if CERN tomorrow came out and said that antimatter does behave differently than matter in a gravitational field, all of a sudden then Witsit would be saying, this is CERN, okay? We can this is really advanced stuff, okay? They're really doing good work. But if they come out with something contradictory to him, then he cannot accept it. And he'll try to find any excuse to try to reject any data that disagrees with his preconceived notions. And yeah, I just think it's really, really funny every time he brings up his friend Zach.
I think I've heard you mention that this effect stays inside, even while inside a Faraday cage. Am I correct?
Yeah, there's still, we measured a vertical electric gradient even in a Faraday cage.
How would that be possible?
Because there's no such thing as a perfect Faraday cage that completely attains zero. Also, it's been proven that even in a vacuum, you have electric permittivity. There's no way to eliminate this variable, right? So you can lower it a lot with the Faraday cage for sure, but it can't attain zero.
When you say we measured
my
it,
second question. My second question
Zach measured it. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
My second question would be if
wait, Max, before you ask the second question, really quick, I just wanted to. I asked who measured it, and who did you say?
Zach, Good Times for All. I'll get him doing it. But I will say it's like
so this is just like a friend
when you
of yours
see him use
this.
the voltmeter and measure the vertical gradient, it's not like you're going to be like, oh man, let me reconsider my position. You'll just dismiss it. And the biggest point of that is he needs to understand that Faraday cages are supposed to block electromagnetic energy from the outside. It doesn't remove what's inside of it. You can't.
Yeah.
So your friend measured it, and you trust them.
Yes, that's right. I trust the guy that does physical tests with the actual equipment he's let me borrow and documented it, and he's not the only one that's done it. Other people have replicated it. So yes, I trust it.
Anecdotal evidence fallacy doesn't mean that it's wrong, bro.
Correct. I agree. So did he use like a fluke multimeter or like a voltmeter?
Yeah,
where he just put the probes in the air? Like they do have an air tolerance. Like they're not perfect meters, a fluke specifically. Like they're not accurate at low levels. Just to point it out,
but doesn't everyone agree that you think it's a coincidence that it went up when it went up with elevation or altitude? Come on, bro. Like, does everyone agree that there is still something in the Faraday cage?
If you have anything generating EMF in the Faraday gauge, you will measure voltage in the Faraday gauge. You cannot reduce it to zero, but typically, like even in the Feynman papers, they just say, well, we're going to treat it as if the voltage is zero because so we can't create a perfect Faraday cage, but we'll treat it
But that's a them problem, right? Like even when Grayson came on my show and was talking about the world's smallest Cavendish that was recently done, they grounded it. I'm sure it was in a Faraday cage. They discharged everything, and they still had to put Faraday material in between the two masses, and they still knew that there was a possible variable of electromagnetic effect. There is no way to remove it, even in a vacuum chamber. If you have a vacuum sealed Faraday, there's still electric permittivity in there.
Well, because we can't create a zero torr vacuum on Earth, so there's going to be
it's more just a statement that the electromagnetic field is everywhere and will, even at its lowest energy, still be at still have a non-zero potential.
Yeah, I want to make it clear here that we're not saying
you guys seem to
nothing at all.
deny it.
It's just like you're claiming there's a gradient.
That's what his measurement showed. Like I haven't replicated it myself, but what's funny is I want to, and every time I do, I found out you guys just pretend it didn't happen anyway. Every time I go do the test and document it, it gets put in a level documentary in front of millions of people. You guys will all just deny it anyway. So it's whatever, bro. Let's be real. If I go and do it myself, you'll say I did it wrong, or you'll just ignore it. You'll say it still doesn't prove what I say, or whatever.
Okay. At this point, it has to be projection, right? I mean, he is literally describing his own behavior. He's saying no matter what evidence I put forward, you guys are always going to reject it based on your preconceived notions. Like, Witsit, my guy, we literally just watched you admitting that that's what you do. You just said, I already know that gravity isn't real. Mass doesn't attract mass. It's all electromagnetic. And I haven't looked at those studies, but I already know before reading them that they're actually electrostatic. You admitted to this, Witsit, and now you're trying to blame that. You're trying to say that behavior is on globe earthers, and you're trying to say that's a bad thing when you yourself freely admitted that's what you do.
The point is that when we invoke anyone that shows evidence contrary to your position, you guys hand-wave dismiss them as quacks. So if they are Nobel Prize winners in your own paradigm, if they are Nobel Prize winners in your own paradigm, then we point it out, not appealing to their authority, but the evidence. But this is what I want to ask you guys, okay? please give me a good faith answer to this. So although we know that your current paradigm, for the most part, accepts relativity. That's like the top leader right now, right? The official position is we know that best case scenario, it's incomplete, okay? And that it could just be completely wrong and replaced. And we have a dark matter problem. Some people think, well, maybe the dark matter isn't actually there. Maybe just our understanding of gravity is wrong, etc. There are some people, like the astrophysics professor from Australia, who proposed a new theory of gravity that's electromagnetic. And if you go check the equations, you can see that it actually uses makes testable predictions with the permittivity, electric permittivity in a vacuum, the electromagnetic vacuum, right? And that it gives you an equivalence for big G. So it's able to actually make a major solution for your paradigm. And not that you guys should just accept it or believe it or whatever, but why would you guys not at least be open to possible solutions when the truth is everyone knows that relativity either is grossly incomplete or there must be something amazing going on that we can't find? Why wouldn't you be open to that? Because what I've found is because they've heard me say I think it's electromagnetic so much that they just have to automatically call that dude a quack and dismiss him and call it fringe and appeal to majority and all this nonsense. But like, why aren't you guys open to alternatives that explain that gravity could be electromagnetic, which would remove the requirement for proportionate mass and could help you with your major problems in cosmology? Why are you guys not open to that?
I'm not. We already have defined both those forces, and we know that they're not the same.
Are you talking about Mies?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so Mies, one of those testable predictions that he made was that antimatter should behave oppositely to matter in a gravitational field, and that was tested, and his prediction failed.
No, you keep saying that, right?
Yeah, and I cited you the paper that showed it too from CERN.
You cited it where?
The last time that we talked, and you said, I just don't trust anything CERN says.
I said I have to look into the specifics because I know that CERN.
I cited you the paper.
I haven't.
I told you the title and the authors last time we talked.
No, but when I asked you about the specifics, you didn't even know, dude. You didn't even know exactly how it was done or how it worked or whatever. So, like, you're claiming like you know for sure it disproves something, but you don't. And what I understand from what I've read before is that this quote-unquote study of antimatter is highly suspect. Like, it's admittedly very fringe. We don't fully understand the concept, and it's inconsistent.
So you don't trust CERN is basically what I'm hearing.
But I specifically didn't say that, right? I said that the study of supposed antimatter.
Do you guys not know who their mascot is? Who's literally who they have outside of
the god of destruction?
It's not a mascot. It's just a statue. This has been told and refuted time and again. Most of the people that are working at CERN are probably fucking atheists, okay? Like, they don't believe in any gods.
Then what were they doing at the tunnel with that weird little ritual thing, dancing around like crazy fucking people?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about, but there's been lots of videos of people dancing at CERN, like when they've made really cool discoveries.
Now, let me help out everyone here. So, flat earthers say that they had this really demonic ritual, what they do, like pretty close to CERN, right? Where they had this grand opening of a tunnel, but it was actually for a railroad. And they do this crazy, weird, demonic stuff. They like literally demonic. They dress up like literally Baphomet and stuff like that. But it's not, it's just really close to CERN. And there were CERN scientists there that participated in it, but it wasn't actually something thrown by CERN themselves, is what I've heard from globe earthers. So that's just to clear all of that up, but it is kind of creepy and weird. I'm going to fall back, but I'm going to say one last thing. My actual question got completely ducked. I mean, you brought up the antimatter thing, but this is what I think is funny. First, they say there's nothing else that can explain the kinematics and dynamics or even get to solve for the equations and blah, blah, blah. And there actually is, and it's a fact. You can test the fluctuation of the permittivity to see if it actually means that gravity is variant. So it's a very testable prediction. That hasn't been disproven. It's actually been verified in many ways. And I'm just explaining that you guys always move the goalpost. So now it's like, oh, if you can find one thing you think that a very fringe observation of antimatter at CERN supposedly didn't fully align with, then the whole thing's wrong. But we can make up 96% of the universe to keep relativity. You guys have such inconsistent logic and critique. If there's anything that goes against your paradigm or the current consensus or any way supports something Witsit said, then we're going to go through it with a fine comb and find anything we can think of. When it comes to relativity, you're going to basically accept it on its face like it's a religion and then make up excuses for every time it doesn't work.
That's how
and relativity's been debunked by Runzi Cal.
Yeah, okay. Witsit, the guy you cited made a prediction that was falsified. So your model that this guy's putting forward was falsified by that observation at CERN. I know you don't trust CERN or whatever, but they published their data on this. it is like, again, a huge collaboration showing this experiment. Okay, you're just saying that because if I don't understand every detail of it, that somehow falsifies it
I
or
didn't
makes it
say
not
that.
true or something?
No, I said that you can't even articulate how it supposedly falsified it with any actual substantive specificity, but then tell me I need to read it all and understand it before I
can't do
cannot
that,
finally.
though. They showed that antimatter behaves the same as matter in a gravitational field. So that does falsify Mies because Mies predicted the opposite of that. I can specifically demonstrate how that disproves your model or the model that Mies put forward.
That's very intellectual of you. It behaved the same. Wow, I'm convinced it behaved the same.
You
Thank
don't know
you
what
for
that
the
means?
physics breakdown. I'm sold. I'm done. Like, no, dude, that's not how it works. What do you mean behave the same? What does that mean?
Can you believe every paper's true? Because like there is consensus to build around papers. So I'm not going to accept one paper's claim that says theory of relativity doesn't work. It's going to be based upon retesting those papers, confirming
Papers can be
the
bought and
claim.
paid for, bro.
Well, why don't you feel
Regardless
the
of the
same
point,
way?
then why trust any paper, Flatman B? Like, why trust any paper?
I think you should test the evidence against the claims of the paper. It shouldn't matter who writes it, if it's some dude in a cave or whatever.
But you
You
can't
should test
test
the
it.
evidence of the paper. But what I'm saying is that this has a very bold prediction in it. And what it says is even experts in my own field admit, like, look, we are having to open up our minds to maybe completely revising our understanding of gravity, including an electromagnetic interpretation. Well, you guys can't admit it because
That's not happening.
Okay.
You know, I did
That's
look
not
at
at
the
all
Mies
happening.
paper and I saw where he predicted that antimatter would be affected in an opposite way to regular matter
I've still got my
in
question
his
raised
version
about
of
that.
gravity. I saw him making that prediction, and then I had previously read, like months before, the news from CERN that they had proven the opposite. So then, whenever we talked, then I looked at the CERN paper, which I had not read when we talked, and then I showed it on screen. And then you said, "Interesting, I'll have to look at that." That's how that conversation went with it.
How can they claim anything about antimatter when they can't actually prove that antimatter exists?
Oh my!
Well, we already
God.
have shown that it exists.
We do know antimatter exists. We literally have made it. It's not a big mystery.
Okay, then what's antimatter? Someone explain it.
A positron is exactly the same thing as an electron. It just has a positive charge instead of a negative charge. Flip the charge and you get antimatter.
And that's what the paper says, that they'll be opposite. And he's saying that this paper proves that they're not opposite, that they're the same. So they're opposite but the same is Grayson's
Okay,
first.
come on. You know that that's a straw man. Come on.
I'm reading the paper. I don't think you've even read it.
But if it was falsified by other testing, then you don't.
What testing?
Equivocation. You're saying like that we're saying they're opposite in charge. They have certain properties that are opposite. However, they have the same mass, and that's why they're affected in the same way from gravity and not the opposite way. If gravity was electromagnetic in nature, we know one thing about electromagnetism, and that there are two polar opposite charges. You can call them plus or minus. Who cares what you call them? They're polar opposite, and they behave in opposite ways in an electric field.
Wait, have you not put together the major flaw here? That if they have to invoke the presence of a gravitational field within their own understanding of where that would be, right? And then you're going to say that that falsifies a different application interpretation of the gravitational field itself, then that's completely non sequitur. I'm going to read the whole paper, though. I'm going to read the whole paper instead of cherry picking.
Okay. You think that this gravitational force that they're talking about, you think that that's electromagnetic in nature, but there is no electromagnetic field in which two oppositely charged things behave the same. It doesn't, like, that's what falsifies it, is because they're observing these behave the same in the presence of a field. They're saying it's gravity. I get that you don't like that, but if it was electromagnetic, their results could not be explained.
You can't remove all the variables, bro. You cannot remove electrostatics from any experiment.
That's true. Actually, you can do electromagnetism on gravitational fields, which is how we know they're different things.
I'd like to ask my question. I've been trying for a while. Based. So let's not talk about antimatter. Just in regular matter, you got an electron, you got a proton. Regardless, you got a neutron. All of it falls, even the things that have opposite charges. So why wouldn't you, like, there's an assumption, and their inherent assumption is built into it, is like the angle of approach that you're taking to attack it is saying the model doesn't work. So the inherent assumption is that if there was something known as antimatter, which was actually fundamentally like inverted as compared to what we think of as matter, then it would behave oppositely. But if you take away that assumption and you think, hey, whatever we're designating as antimatter, that's just a name we call it. Really, fundamentally, it's made of the same exact substrate as matter. Therefore, it would behave the same. Like, he could be right about all the math and everything else, and just the definition about what they're calling antimatter being different than what we actually observe. It wouldn't falsify the model.
Can you make your statement make more sense?
Okay.
All I got out of that was
Breaking
that
it down into a simple
antimatter
way.
is matter.
Bringing it down simply, if antimatter, like as Constantine Mice conceptualized it, right, is not the exact same as what they are claiming to pick up and detect as quote unquote antimatter, then you don't have an equivalency there, and it wouldn't even refute it anyway.
You're saying, what if antimatter wasn't antimatter? I really do not understand what you're trying. What point you're trying to make.
Constantine Mice's conception of antimatter
Who
would
the
have
fuck
to be
is
the
that?
exact same as what CERN's conception of what they claim they're detecting with antimatter is, in order for your point to be correct.
I'm reading through this. It doesn't say what you're saying at all. So would you like to cite a specific part in the paper?
The Constantine Mises paper?
No.
The CERN paper?
Yes.
Like, yeah, their results are that antimatter behaves the same way that regular matter does. That's what the paper showed.
Okay, so you're citing the conclusion. Is that what you're saying? Because I'm reading through the paper, so you're saying I need to skip down to the conclusion. Is that what you did? You're saying the conclusion says they behave the same way? Because it specifically says that they don't. It says that there's a slight difference, but it's not significant, that they applied bias values. That's what it says halfway through the paper, is that the 10G and 20G actually were different. Of the anti-hydrogen atoms. The anti-hydrogen atoms, there was a difference. That's what it actually says. So I'm not sure.
Wait, is he meaning the nature?
Hey,
the nature
everybody.
paper?
So we're going
Yes.
over 2 hours. The show plan was for 2 hours, so I do want to like work towards wrapping this up. But I love the discussion.
And there you have it. There's the sum total of my interactions with Witsit that have been recorded. Hopefully, this is not going to be the only debate I'm ever going to have with Witsit. I would still like, despite all of his dodging, all of his jargon, all of his stubborn close-mindedness to reject all evidence out of hand, just hand wave it away because it disagrees with his preconceived notions. Despite all that, I would still like to do a 1v1 debate against Witsit at some point. So, you know, if you guys see him anywhere, try to say, hey, you should debate Grayson. Even people in the comments of that panel were saying that Grayson and Witsit should have their own 1v1 debate. I mean, I think it's what the people want. It's what I would like to happen at some point. We know that he's probably not going to agree to do a flat Earth debate. It's probably going to be some stupid thing about ether. But whatever, I'll do that too, because Witsit is super wrong about that stuff as well. Yeah, we could already see just in that last exchange that anytime that you bring up any experimental evidence that definitively falsifies his position, he'll just comb through the paper, not actually reading it, mind you. We saw it during that live stream. He's combing through the paper, trying to find anything that he can twist or spin to try to cast doubt on their results. Like, no, it straight up says, point blank in the paper, that this repulsive anti-gravity that Mies is the one who was predicting, that is definitively ruled out. That is in the paper itself. Like, they completely falsify the idea that gravity is electromagnetic in nature. And he just wants to clutch at any straws that he can to maintain his own sense of being right. He thinks he already knows the answer before all these experiments. He thinks he is already right about all this stuff. And so any evidence to the contrary, there has to be something wrong with it. There has to be some sort of hole or flaw that he can latch onto, that he can convince himself, no, I'm not wrong. All the evidence to the contrary is wrong. And so, yeah, I would just like the opportunity to be able to, on a 1v1, bring up all that evidence that definitively shows that he's wrong, and all he can do is bring up his friend Zach. So if you want to see that happen, please like this video, subscribe for more debates, and yeah, hopefully we can bug Witsit into actually doing a real debate.